Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. Donald Trump has become not just a destructive force, but a calamitous, almost demonic force in American society. He undermines the rule of law at every opportunity. His bigotry seems to know no bounds. His treatment of and comments about women are nauseating. Trump makes no secret of his contempt for democracy. I offer January 6, 2021 as Exhibit A, and he openly espouses the persecution of his political enemies. Why anyone with a heart and a brain and the capacity to empathize with other human beings could even consider voting for this man is beyond me. For those of us in the press and media writ large, the question on the table is, what is our responsibility? How have we been complicit in this long-running disaster? Why have so many of us performed our jobs so poorly? And what should we be doing now in the midst of this existential crisis for the United States of America, a country that means so much to so many? There is no better person to talk about this than my guest, Eric Alterman. He's an historian, a journalist, a distinguished professor of English at our own Brooklyn College, and the former media columnist for The Nation magazine. Eric, welcome. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Always happy to be invited, Bob.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's go back to when Trump came down the escalator and announced that he was going to run for president in 2016. He had a history with the press for decades even before that. A lot of us knew him and had covered him. But it seemed like the press did not know how to deal with that announcement. Was this a joke? Should he be taken seriously? Should he be treated like any other presidential candidate? Was he just a clown? What was the approach in terms of coverage that should have been taken right from the start?
Well, I'm going to plead guilty to also not taking him sufficiently seriously. I thought he was a clown. I thought his campaign was clownish. Right from the beginning when he went down that escalator.
It was clownish.
And he hired the actors to cheer for him.
Right.
In New York, we knew a lot about Trump. We had lived with Trump. We knew he was a shyster. We knew of his affairs. We knew how ridiculous he was.
Yep.
We didn't know on TV how far NBC and others went to hide his how crappy his business was.
Right.
But that came out later. But he was hard to take seriously, and plus he was, obviously great for the media business, which was in crisis. He was getting ratings like they had not seen really ever, so they were reluctant to break the golden egg, whatever that metaphor is.
So at the time, I mean, he was having those rallies, and so many people thought that they were really entertaining. I mean, people were tuning in to see what was he going to say next. And MSNBC and CNN especially were all in on the coverage.
Right. He could phone into the show and they would cover that. They would have, for 15 minutes, they would say Trump about to appear on the television screen. They completely broke all the rules that they had always followed, just in the way that they covered a campaign, much less what they let him get away with saying.
So it's easy, obviously, with hindsight, but let me put you in the chair of the person in charge of CNN or MSNBC at the time. He's having these rallies. Ratings are going up whenever he's on the air. You have a staff meeting. What do you think you might have been telling people?
I worked for MSNBC for 2 years. I was on there the very first day they were on the air. And I was part of a group, they called us the Friends. We would talk about the news. Young people mostly, we were under 30, around 30. And the head of NBC News, hardly anybody watched MSNBC in those days.
Right.
But the head of NBC News used to watch us with the Nielsen meter on. And if we were talking about a topic that was losing people, he would say, go back to OJ, or go back to Clinton and Monica. Like, they were so conscious of competing with other stations and the clicker. Yep. That was really all they cared about. They cared about that, and they cared if he said something that might get them in trouble, which I frequently did.
But basically, if you had taken another tack, if you had been in charge and taken another tack and said, well, we're going to cover this the way responsible journalists cover presidential campaigns,
It never occurred.
you would have been
I
bounced,
would have lost my job.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's a famous quote from Les Moon.
Moonves.
Yeah, at CBS. He said, "Trump may not be good for the country, but he sure is good for CBS."
Yep. Wow.
And that's how they see their job.
Anyway, he wins the election. Obviously, many people were shocked. Hillary was a terrible candidate,
Yeah.
but Trump should never have won that election, even with her not being a good candidate. You covered the 4 years, paid close attention and wrote about and understood the coverage of the 4 years of the Trump administration. Give us kind of an overall assessment of how the media did in covering Trump, and they were wild, insane years,
Yeah.
including COVID and impeachments and on and
Drink
on.
bleach.
Yeah. Oh, God.
I tell you, when I was writing about Trump's presidency, I always had one question in my head, which is how in the world could this have happened? I mean, Trump is a clown and
Right.
and a crook and all kinds of terrible things, psychopath. So how is it that this country,
And hostile to everything the United States is supposed to stand for.
exactly. Now, so whenever I wrote about it, I tried to make some connection, seeing Trump as, I didn't have to demonstrate he was a clown. People knew it. The question is what's happened to this country that he's the president? And one answer I give is that the mainstream media decided that they had no right to judge anything. Trump appealed to so many millions of people who they needed, if not necessarily for profit, although they certainly did, but they needed to be able to say, we speak to and for America. And this America hates us, doesn't trust us, thinks we're elitist liberals. And Fox is making $1 billion a year, and we're losing money. So they lost their self-confidence. They weren't able to say, here's what matters, here's what doesn't matter, here's what's true, here's what's not true. And they just sent everything out there and threw it against the wall and saw what stuck.
Right.
I mean, there's always been a fundamental problem with objective journalism, which we've known has been very clear, made by Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy used to say, Bob Herbert's a communist.
Right.
And then they would go to Bob Herbert and say, are you a communist? And you'd say, no, there's no evidence at all, I've never been a communist. And they would say, the junior senator from Wisconsin says this man's a communist, the man denies it, you be the judge. Okay, that doesn't work. How can anyone judge? So Trump is McCarthy on steroids on every single issue.
And the idea
there
is already planted.
Right.
That, I'm a communist.
And they feel like it's not their business, even if they know that it's a lie, to say that Trump's lying. They might say it in somewhere else in a fact check.
Right.
But otherwise, it's their job to be respectful of the president, be respectful of the candidate, be respectful of the people out there, the great unwashed, so they don't accuse us of being liberal elitists. And the result is that the Republicans, not just Trump, the Republicans are given free rein to say whatever they want, however ridiculous. We saw this beginning, and Trump was at the forefront of this with Obama and the Muslim issue.
Right.
That's where they realized they could get away with anything. And there was a dividing line between Republicans who went for it and Republicans who didn't. But I tell you, I studied this. Almost never were they corrected on the Sunday shows when they said, we don't know, maybe he's a Christian, maybe he's not. They never said, we do know. We do know.
Right. Obviously, that should not be the case. People should not be able to just bring up lies, falsehoods, and that sort of thing, toss them out there, and then we act like this is a legitimate thing to be talked about, or give some kind of equivalence to the denials and the accusations. So what's the approach that should be taken?
You know, journalists, the media,
one thing, we need to put things in context more than we do now. But
context, but also the obligation is to what we know to be true. Now, it's an imperfect thing.
Right.
We sometimes find out that what we think is true is not true.
Yeah.
But the job is to find out what's true and defend it. You know, there's a wonderful movie starring Michael Keaton, and he plays a reporter, and he's a tabloid reporter in New York, and they're about to run a story that he's learned is not true.
Is it called?
Yes, thank you. And the woman in charge says, okay, we'll run it tonight and we'll fix it tomorrow.
You drive me crazy when you're like this. But what are you wearing? It's wrong.
Not for today, it's not. Tomorrow it's wrong. We only have to be right for a day.
People will read this, Alicia, and they'll believe us.
And he says, we run a lot of crap in this New York Post type paper, but we've never ever run something we knew was false.
Right.
And so he gets to, there's this wonderful one where he gets to yell, stop the presses. But anyway, that's gone. They run things that they know are false. And because somebody in responsibility said them. And they might say, there's some disagreement here. Maybe the sun didn't rise in the west and set in the east.
Right.
But you be the judge. So there's no sense of responsibility to say, wait a minute, that's false. And because that's number one, it's taking a side. Number two, it's elitist, it's unfriendly. Your Q ratings might suffer. But number three, it's insulting to all the people who believe it. Okay, and the way people consume news today, this is one argument they might make, is that people don't care what's true and what's not. They care if you're on their side or not. And if you're a stickler for truth, then you're not on their side. I see this, I mean, this is not just with them. This is true of almost everyone.
And if all you care about are ratings or popularity or being in with the in crowd or whatever, then in terms of journalism, fundamentally you're doomed. I mean, that's not what journalism.
Right,
journalism
but
is something else.
Right, but I'm telling you, that's
No, I absolutely agree. We see it every day. You're right.
There's a few
you're
things
correct.
in this world, just a few things that I know better than anyone else that the rest of the world doesn't know. I'll give you one example. Gore beat Bush by every measurable count. There was
Right.
only one count that Bush could have beaten Gore, and that's the one that Gore's idiotic lawyers happened to choose. But I went deeply into those counts, and every single Chad properly counted would have.
Yeah.
Everybody tells me to shut up about that. They say, oh, they looked into it and Bush won. But that's not true. And if you say the truth, you lose your credibility because you're considered a fanatic, and also you're on the wrong side of all the people who've said it.
Right.
So,
but it's always the folks who are more liberal, who are considered the fanatics. We have the right-wingers who are fanatics, but no one is coming down on them in the same way. They just don't have standards that they have to abide by.
I mean, I think, I don't know the answer to this, but how we've normalized not only Trump, but Marjorie Taylor Greene and Elise Stefanik and Lindsey Graham. How we've normalized these people when they're patently ridiculous.
Absurd, right. They say things that you think are coming out of the head of lunatics, so. But you mentioned Fox News, and I have always thought from the days long ago when I was at the Daily News and Rupert Murdoch bought the Post, that the Murdoch operations should have been a major story in this country. The way that Murdoch corrupted not just journalism, but corrupted politics in Australia, in Great Britain, in the United States, and in some cases even corrupted the workings of government. Is that just, why is that considered off base as a big continuing story? Covering Fox News as an outfit that's not really a journalism outfit, and covering Rupert Murdoch as a malign force in the life of the United States of America.
Two things. First of all, the New York Times Magazine did do late in the day, a 3-part series saying just that. But I'm going to have to brag for a moment. I've twice won the award for best media columnist from Syracuse University's.
And with good reason.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One time I won it for a series of columns about Fox News. I made the point, Fox News is not news. Fox News is a propaganda organization. So they have a ceremony where they give an award. They give a big award to some rich person, and he invites his friends, and that's how they raise money for their organization. The Mirror Awards, they're called. And both times, I have accepted the award, and everybody just says thank you, and I say, Fox News is not news. It's lies. You might say MSNBC is biased, but they don't lie.
Right.
Stop treating Fox News as news. And there are a lot of Fox News people there, and people boo me, and they say that's inappropriate. It's very important. It's inappropriate. It's bad manners. And like they don't like to give me the award because they know I'm going to do this. And my daughter says, Eric, what are you doing? but that's a big important thing. Fox News makes money. People need jobs. They don't like to rat on their friends. They're part of the fraternity, although they shouldn't be. And that's the media. You know, it's like cops. Cops are on the side of other cops.
Right.
You know, and journalists are on the side of other journalists. They feel beleaguered. They don't make much money. They don't get the respect that they want. And they stick up for each other.
And this may be a normal human impulse. I'm not saying it's not. But that's not what, in my view at least, and I've been in this business over half a century now, that's not what journalists are supposed to be doing. And why do we need to be popular? I mean, who cares?
Today you need to be popular to stay in business, I would say.
Well, then it's not journalism. So let's find a way to do journalism where at least some people can do journalism without worrying about being
I have
popular.
written 100 columns on this topic. Foundations need to fund journalism because
That's right.
but they won't because it's controversial and they're too slow. Journalism is fast and foundations are slow. And, actually, tiny little bit of good news. The New York State budget that was passed this week, they've got money in it to fund local journalism. It's like the first state in the country. So if you hire a local journalist, they'll give you $50,000 toward that person's salary.
Given what you've just been talking about, are we in sort of this post-journalism, or are we approaching a post-journalism era in which it's no longer possible to offer like decent, sensible, reality-based journalism that's accepted by a majority of Americans? Is that,
Yes.
all right, then where are we without that?
Well, there's two Americas. I actually think there's been two Americas forever. One settled in Virginia and one settled in New England. And we're still divided now in much the same way. The Confederacy is still something in our bloodstream. And journalism, instead of being the old model of three networks and a local newspaper where the guy who owned it was a good citizen of the
Right.
and they felt they had a sense of
Right.
responsibility. Now it's a battle between people who hate journalists, hate universities, hate what they understand to be the elite, blame them, along with immigrants, for their problems, and people who would like to do journalism but are afraid of those people and don't like the accusation and feel they need to somehow respond to those people and show their respect for those people and maybe even win them over. And so you have one side which is way over here in terms of we don't care about truth, we care about what we want to hear. And this side who's in the middle but concerned about that side. And there's nobody really on the left. The left has its own set of problems. We could talk about that.
No
another day.
kidding.
But there's what used to be the left is now the center, and what used to be the crazy people are now the responsible right.
Right.
And so the discussion is entirely skewed. And I mean, by far and away, the New York Times is the most powerful journalistic institution in the country in every measurable way, much more so than it's been in my lifetime. And yet it is so concerned about offending Trump's voters and Trump's people that it will say the truth in one article, but in the next article it will say, well, there's two different visions
Right,
of the country
right.
and they don't match. And isn't that interesting?
We're not by any means saying that all journalism is bad and that nobody is doing a
No, I wouldn't
good-
know anything if
good-
it weren't for
good
the
job
good
and cover.
journalists. Yeah.
Exactly. But can you talk a little bit about what maybe has gone right with journalism during the Trump years,
What's gone right?
or who's doing a good job?
Who's doing a good job?
Silence.
I really don't have a good answer for that. I mean, there are good journalists. And usually they're journalists who stick to one topic and really know what they're talking about.
Do you think that the New York Times and the Washington Post, for example, magazine like Atlantic, I'm just drawing things off the top of my head, all in all, they do a pretty good job?
I think the New Yorker does a great job.
Okay.
I trust the New Yorker.
Mm-hmm.
For long pieces, I read the New York Review of Books.
So do I. I think that's really.
The New York Times and the Washington Post.
I wish the New York Review of Books was better known and had bigger.
Well, they would be if they had reviewed my last book. But here's the thing about the Times and the Post. They do a great job, and they also do a terrible job at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm reluctant to say they do a great job because, again, they're so concerned about their audience that that a lot of their stories are impossible to defend in journalistic terms. The New York Times is so cautious about what language it's willing to
Right.
use.
Very cautious.
No, so it's the best newspaper in the English-speaking world.
It's still an essential newspaper. You still need to read the Times.
can't live
every
without
day
it.
If you want to know what's going on.
Right.
In the world,
I mean,
even with all its flaws.
I mean, if there's a report on one issue, I might trust The Guardian more than I
Right.
trust The Times because I share the values of their editors.
Right.
If I'm reading about Israel and Palestine, which is one of my supposed, I trust Haaretz more than I trust The Times, because I know that those two publications are less concerned with appealing to Trumpers and being called elitist and liberal. That's, I think, and it's weird, because the Times is so profitable. It's like barely even a newspaper. It's this massive corporation with cooking and Wordle and so forth. And yet they feel that the most important thing that they can do is, it's like they're politicians, that they represent the country.
Well, they feel like that's what got them to this level of profitability and this behemoth status.
Well, also they
So-
they say the top executives at the Times who earn tens of millions of dollars, they socialize with other really rich people,
Yeah.
and they don't like to be accused of being liberal, sops.
Right.
So a lot of it is socialization. And this thing about journalism, I always make this point. I compare it. I learned about it from reading John Dewey when I was in grad school. If you're in high school and you go to college, you're interested in impressing the people who you're at college with, not the people back in your high
Right.
school, except maybe
Right.
when you go to a reunion.
Right.
So who you work with and who you socialize with is your audience.
Right. It makes a difference.
Right.
Of course.
And so the people out there who you went there to represent because you cared about the truth and you wanted to speak truth to power, you lose track of these people. And you're responsible to your fellows and to the people who you work for. And those people who you work for are corporate people, and they don't want trouble. They don't like being attacked by Trump, and it's a big problem for them. And the last thing is that the right is so much better at working the rest than the left is. That
Right.
all the noise comes from one direction.
Right. And it's been like that for, I don't know how long, decades, it seems to me. We're now in a presidential campaign again. We've got the Trump trials going on. We've been seeing Trump, for, almost a decade now as a presidential possibility and 4 years as president. You're now in the editor's chair of a major newspaper, and you have to shape the coverage of this campaign going forward. What are some of the things that you would spotlight in that coverage that you want your reporters and editors to be sure to emphasize?
It's a tough question. Well, first of all, with Trump, there's just so much.
There's too much.
There's too much. It's too ridiculous. Every day I read the newspaper, literally every day, and I try to remember
And you,
10 years ago, and I say to myself, Eric, from 15 years ago, this is what the country's come to. And I'm like, I don't believe you. The Democrats are a problem, politically speaking. They're really bad at politics. The editors of the New York Times, et cetera, will say, how can we highlight this issue if the Democrats themselves are not talking about it? The Democrats need to focus on on a few issues that will move the electorate. Because right now, the country has this crazy, not the country, but the discourse is based on this crazy notion that we were much more economically comfortable under Trump than we are
Isn't that
under
something?
Biden. It's nuts.
The economy is as good maybe as I've seen it in my lifetime,
It's
or
the best-
certainly since the 1960s.
And it's the best in the world by far.
by far.
Yeah. The problem, when you say I'm the editor of a daily newspaper, I wouldn't know how to do that because the day's news overwhelms. Like,
Right.
here's what happened at the trial today, you know. By the way, the guy is a crook. But that's
There's-
not like
there's that.
Yeah, and so we need something that, as you said earlier, we need context more than anything.
Right.
And context is something that most journalists are allergic to.
So we have run out of time. There's so much more to talk about. I wish there wasn't so much of a focus on Trump because there's so many other issues unrelated
Right.
to Trump that are important. But we'll have you back again to talk about some of them, I hope. We've been speaking with Eric Alterman, who is one of our best guests. I really appreciate it. So thank you for coming in,
Thank
Eric.
you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.